I just, you brought up some really good points, and it actually reminded me when when one of the first conversations we had, Jordan, you remember when we when it was me and with the deacon, and we had met at the coffee shop, and if you remember the first thing that was preached to you, do you remember the title?
Was it the wedding? Something with the wedding?
Yes. Yep. The heavenly wedding banquet, right? And so that's actually a very famous, one of their favorite prophecies to study with you, because it's supposed to show you that God the Mother is the true fulfillment of that prophecy and the rest of the Bible, right? But again, when you know, now that we're on the topic of, you know, how the whole Bible is actually talking about this very significant event of AD 70, the fact that AD 70 is so important is not just because Israel was judged, but it's because it ushers in the new covenant age. The old covenant age ends and the new covenant age begins. And that's literally like a lot of Jesus theology when he's preaching, you know, this is the gist of what he's trying to get at. And, you know, going back to that parable, I just want to share this. I think this is really funny. Yeah, if we look at it with the lens of understanding how Jesus was trying to make them understand what was about to happen to Israel in AD 70, we can make a lot more sense of the Bible than trying to make up these weird parables and having to add this plus this plus this plus this equals this. It's not even talking about that. Look at this, Matthew chapter 22. This is one of the members' favorite, one of their favorite parables is the wedding banquet, right? They say the meaning of the parable, the hidden thing, is that there's a God the Mother in South Korea. Well, let's read it. In verse 1, Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. So right off, they don't mention that part. They just read that part fast. It says the kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. So here the father, the king, is preparing a wedding banquet for his son Jesus, right? Yeah. Funny how they don't mention that, right? Because
I'm immediately, I think I've talked about this with Stephen Kelsey, but if you actually step back a minute and think about that, and you put that in, you think about that in light of the WMSCOG's use of this, it creates some significant issues.
Big problems. But think of modalism, right? Modalism. Oh, and it gets better. It gets better. Watch this. So it says, verse 3, he sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. So who was invited? Who were the ones, the servants that were being sent to tell people to come? Is the prophets, right? All the prophets were sent out from the Old Testament time all the way up until Jesus' time, and they were constantly inviting people to the wedding banquet, even at the time of Jesus Christ. And so it says, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet. Why? Jesus is there. Christ is there, the one that the king prepared the wedding banquet for, the one that all the prophets were sent out to usher in this Messiah. It's ready. He's here, right? It says, verse 5, but they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. Right? So who fulfilled this prophecy? The Israelites, the Jewish people were killing the prophets, the apostles, right? That's why in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus Christ says all the blood of all the righteous prophets will be put on this generation. But it gets better. Look in verse 7. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. So, I thought Matthew chapter 22 is talking about
God the Mother
God in South Korea. But actually, when we read it in context, the purpose was to show that because the people that were supposed to be participating in this wedding banquet rejected the king's son, and ended up killing the servants and even the son. What was the king going to do? He said he sent the army. What army was that? Rome. And what did they do? It said they would burn down their city. That happened AD 70. But see, you'll never get that far with the Church of God because they only want to keep you at the first couple of lines, and then they have to go to plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this, and gets you completely off topic. You have no understanding, no context of the scriptures whatsoever. And so, like, again, you're just understanding the scriptures from their lens, their point of view, and you're just completely lost.
Yep. But yeah, there's so much in there. Again, this is a fascinating kind of discussion for me. And I don't know how many people are even hanging on at this point, but hopefully somebody listening to this at some point will get something out of this. I think this is really interesting. I mean, this is just another example, I think, of when you actually start to look at Jesus's words and you put them all together, you see that, man, when he says stuff like this, he's not referring to some vague, like, future end of the world thing. You know, he's not talking about you and me. He's talking about then and now and those people there. He's talking about this nation, God's chosen people who had continually over the years since Abel, you know, killed the prophets. God had sent prophets over and over, and they had killed them. They'd persecuted them. Finally, he sent his son, and they did the same to him. And so he had invited them to be participants in this thing that they refused. And so he's saying, okay, well, now your city is going to be burned and destroyed. And so, yeah, I think there's so many things here that to me are just very apparent that this is a reference to that judgment in 70 AD. And yeah, and so, but if you think about like how this begins, and maybe tell me if you can put your member hat on, like the kingdom of heaven, he says in verse 2, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. Okay, so this is supposed to be about Mother God, right? This is like that. So how would they go from here? Would they say like, okay, well, who is the bride here? I mean, what would they? Because they would say like, well, who's the invited, right? Like we're the invited, so who's the bride, right?
Right. So it's really sleight of hand what they do here. Like if I'm putting my member hat on, I'm trying to skip past the first verse, the first two verses as fast as I can. Yeah. Don't pay attention to that. You know, who's the son or the king? Oh, that's God the Father. But anyway, let's get back to the actual parable, right? Even though that is part of the parable, he already started the parable. No, that's not the parable. Let's get to what we want to say. Then they say, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. And then they say, you see, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, why is it compared to a wedding banquet? If you want to know what heaven is like, you have to know what this wedding banquet is all about. Why is Jesus mentioning it? Why is he saying that if you understand this wedding banquet, you'll understand heaven? So then here's the sleight of hand. Before you keep reading, they have to add their words. So now they say, so in a wedding, in order for a wedding to take place, who has to exist? It has to be a bridegroom, right? And a bride, right? And guest. If the bride's not there, a wedding can't take place. So when you read this parable, it talks about a bridegroom, it talks about guest, but there's no mention of a bride. That must mean, because the bride is not mentioned there, the parable, the secret hidden thing that Jesus is trying to show is that wife, that bride, is going to appear in the last days. Why is that? Because in a wedding, in a physical wedding, how does a wedding take place? The bridegroom is there in the altar, the guests are there, and then who appears at the very end? It's the bride. And then they'll go the da-na-na-na, da-na-na-na, right? The bride comes. Then voila, You see, the bride has to appear at the very end. That's why the bride was not mentioned. That's why in the last days, the bride finally appears. But, and so you kind of see where I'm going with this. But, but again, you have to add those words in there. You have to start talking about, well, he's not talking about the bride. He's not, there's a reason why Jesus Christ didn't mention a bride, is because that wasn't the point of it.
Yeah.
The point is the wedding banquet was set up for the son, and he's trying to bring all the guests, literally the bride, that he's trying to bring them in. But what are they doing? They're rejecting him. And because of that, because they rejected the Messiah and killed him, this is why God was going to bring judgment upon that generation. And that's literally the point if you read it in context.
Isn't it amazing, though, that they take the thing, Jesus leaves out the bride because that's not the point, and that's just not an important part of conveying what he's trying to convey here. In other places, he does mention a bride because it's more important and integral to him getting across his point. Here, he leaves that out because it's not the point. So they take what Jesus specifically leaves out because it's not his point, and then they try to make that the very point of what he's saying. Like how how much more could you try to like completely miss the point of what Jesus is trying to do here?
Yeah, and cut out the most important part, which was about the destruction of Jerusalem and the warning. It's like they neglect Jesus' words. They could care. This is the honest truth. They could care less Jesus' actual words. Mm-hmm. They only want to quote the verses that benefits their doctrine.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. They don't care. They don't have like an actual respect and reverence for what Jesus actually said. They're not approaching the Bible with this humble attitude of, okay, this has something to say. I want to know what this says. They're approaching it with the idea of, I need this to convey a certain message that lines up with my agenda. So let's go into this and figure out how can we pull out of this ideas that match my bias, already pre-assumed, belief system. But another problem with this, Edgar, is, if they say, well, why did Jesus, who's left out here? The bride is left out. So that must mean that's Jesus's, the secret is hidden here. Well, who else is left out here? Well, first off, he mentions a king. Who's the king? Like, and this is a genuine question. Like, if you were a WMSCOG member and I asked you that, because I really don't know, like, who do they think the king is?
They stay away from that. Like, some will say God the Father, but they won't stay on that, because they're just gonna, if you really put someone on the spot, a member in the church, like, who's the king and who's the son? They're, that's just God the Father. They'll just group it all as one. Yeah. That's God the Father, to make you like just skip. I've literally seen deacons, I've seen missionaries go over these. I remember asking a deacon specifically on a Zoom, a question about, modalism in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which is kind of the same gist of what Jesus is saying. He's separating the Father and the Son. I asked a question of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 about when Paul separates the Father and the Son. I said, why does it do that? Why does it sound like that? He said, oh, brother, you just need to study more about the Trinity. That's just God the Father. Later, when you study and you pray, you'll understand. No, that's the problem, is I have studied.
Yeah, right. That is the problem.
It does not add up, so, but it's so crazy how even the deception of the leadership all the way up, even they themselves are deceived,
Yeah. Yeah. Chrissy Mendez, hello. Glad you're here. She said, transitions are the glue that holds their twisted doctrine together. Yeah. That's so true. And transitions, we've talked about those a little bit in the past, but it's just kind of the way that they jump from verse to verse and make it appear as if there's like a legitimate connection and like a stream of like thought that runs through these verses, but really they're just anything that, it goes back to that they're not approaching the text trying to actually figure out what it's actually saying. They're approaching it with assumptions about what they want it to say, and then finding any possible way they can connect it to their doctrine, and connecting verses and jumping from verse to verse. Go ahead. You had
it's so sad, Jordan, because like how you said, they're so preoccupied with that. But again, it goes back to when they accepted, you know, things like this. The moment you start accepting, you know, all these organizations' materials, you trade away that freedom for you to study the scriptures and come to an honest understanding of what God is trying to tell you through his holy word. And that's scary. It's so sad to me because, again, it's not that they can't read. The problem is when you give somebody a book and tell them this is the most important things of the Bible, this is what makes you understand the Bible. Well, when you go to that sermon book and you read Matthew chapter 22 and it begins to explain the parable of the wedding banquet, it doesn't tell you to read over that verse or to focus on that verse. These books literally tell you this is what you need to focus on. This is what you need to explain. This is what it means. This is what you have to add. These are the words you got to throw in, and you're just, you know, and you're just accepting all of it. And again, you never get to deal with the word of God, the inspired word of God. And you're, to all the members that are listening, you're missing out on so much beautiful. The Bible is not confusing. It's really not. The Bible is in harmony. The 66 books of the Bible are in harmony with one another. It's one most important picture. The picture that the Bible paints is Jesus Christ. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you brought up the fact that they get you when they get you to read their books and accept their books. Like when you accept their materials, that's kind of where you're kind of in a bad situation. And would you say that they almost, in a similar way to, they kind of make you fear going to the internet? Do you think that there's a similar way that they make you fear or apprehend reading the Bible, like on its own without the WMSCOG materials? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like for sure. It's implied, you know, like they're never going to tell you don't read the Bible, because then you're just going to be like, what, you know? But it's what they don't say. It's how they imply, like, you know, oh, hey, I just got baptized, you know, let me study the Bible for myself. And, you know, cause you brought up a lot of interesting things that I've never heard about. So let me go back to my house and study for a bit, and then I'll come back and try to make sense of this. Oh, no. You got to come with us. You're a baby in the truth. You don't understand these things. You need us to teach you. You need us to teach you what is the truth. Only we know what is the truth. You got to come to our Bible studies, because the whole world is Babylon, and they're going to lead you astray, and you're going to have the mark of the beast and yada, yada, yada. Right. And case in point is the truth is only exclusive to them. And that's the same story, you know, repeated by all these different groups. They're the only ones that know the truth, and stay away from, you know, they don't like again, they hand you these books for a reason. They hand you these books so that you already understand the Bible according to their understanding. So, you know, in a way, by doing that, they're keeping you from actually reading the entire Bible. Because when you have these books, what does it make you think? All I need to know about the Bible is in these books.
Mm-hmm. This has the main stuff. This has the main stuff.
Exactly. And if it's not in these books, it must not be that important. Yep. Got you.
Yep. Exactly. So hold on. Here we go. Han says, who's the spiritual flower girl and best man? And he's saying that comedically, but no, honestly, like,
true.
Because if you look at if you take the WMSCOG's arguments, like really so often you can refute and display how ridiculous the World Mission Society Church of God's arguments are simply by using their arguments, those same arguments, in a different context. So, I mean, for example, when they say, hey, well, look at this parable. Who did Jesus leave out? He left out the bride. That must mean the bride is the secret that Jesus is really wanting to reveal here. Well, then you can just simply go back up and say, well, wait a minute. Somebody else was left out here. There was a king, specifically the king was mentioned. Well, if a king has a son, then who's missing in that scenario to allow a king to have a son? Well, a queen or a wife of the king. So why did Jesus specifically mention a king and then conveniently leave out the queen or his wife? Oh, that must mean that there's a God the grandmother. You know, not only is there a bride who is another deity, but there must be another, you know, female deity even above that one. You know, and so doing that, you know, it sounds ridiculous because it is. And if you use that with a WMSCOG member, I almost guarantee that they'd probably be like, oh, they would act as if you're just doing some ridiculous thing. Like even right now, members, if a member hears me saying that, they'd be like, oh, that's ridiculous. And I'm like, well, dude, I'm literally doing exactly what you just did. I'm using the exact same argument that you did. And so you can show how ridiculous their arguments are simply by using those same arguments in sort of a different context. And hopefully that can help them see, it should help you and them see just how irrational and bad their reasoning is, and the way that they, you know, interpret these passages. It doesn't work.
Remember, Jordan, though, they're the only ones that have the right to pick and choose what the verse means. So yeah,
the moment you do it,
have opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. If you do it, boy, you're way off.